Welcome back guys. Now in this video let's discuss about regulation of respiration. Have you ever wondered how your respiration is regulated? It's not under your voluntary control. Okay, of course you can voluntarily control it, but most of the time it is happening involuntarily. Your respiration is happening involuntarily, which means there are certain brainstem structures, there are certain higher centers which are present, which are controlling your respiratory activity. That is, inspiration and expiration are now controlled. Okay, they are controlled involuntarily. Now let's talk about the centers, respiratory centers. Now here I am showing you, this is the spinal cord. Here I am showing you the spinal cord. On the spinal cord there is this area called as the pons, upon which there is midbrain. So midbrain, pons and medulla, all of them together called as the brainstem. Now please look at the pons. In the pons there are two centers present. Now these two centers are called as, in the upper pons there is a pneumotaxic center. So pneumotaxic center present in the upper pons. There is this one center which is called as the apneustic center, which is present in the lower pons. Pneumotaxic center is present in the upper pons. Apneustic center is present in the lower pons. Okay, so these are the two pontine centers of respiration. Now, what are the centers which are present in the medulla? In the medulla, please concentrate. There are this group of cell bodies called as the dorsal respiratory group. So DRG, dorsal respiratory group is present, and ventral respiratory group is present, on which there is one more center which is called as the 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex. So what are the three medullary centers? The three medullary centers are dorsal respiratory group, ventral respiratory group and the 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex. What are the pontine centers? Pontine centers are pneumotaxic center in the upper pons, apneustic center in the lower pons. Okay. Now see pontine centers too, pneumotaxic, apneustic. Remember it like PA. Okay, PEA. Okay, like a personal assistant, PA. So remember all the time, pneumotaxic center P will inhibit the A. So pneumotaxic center inhibits the apneustic center. Remember that point. Okay, it will be kept on coming. Pneumotaxic center inhibits the apneustic center. Now what are the medullary centers? There are three medullary centers, DRG, ventral respiratory group and 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex. And the 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex is the pacemaker of respiration. Okay, SA node is the pacemaker of the heart. Interstitial cells of Ковач are the pacemakers of GIT. In the same way, the pacemakers of respiration is 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex, which is present in the medulla. Okay, which is present in the medulla. Now, let's talk about the opioids. Okay, guys, opioids. Now, morphine. What opioids will do? Whenever you take opioids, respiration will be inhibited or the respiratory rate will come down. Why? Why? Because opioids inhibits 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex. Opioids inhibits 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex, and 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex is inhibited. It's a respiratory pacemaker, right? So pacemaker is getting inhibited. So what happened to respiratory rate? Respiratory rate comes down. So that's why when you take opioids, respiratory rate is affected. Okay. Now let's talk about the medulla and pons. Now these are these are the basic things which you need to know. Okay, later we will discuss in detail. Now these are the basic points. So medulla, with its the three centers, dorsal respiratory group, ventral respiratory group and 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex, is mainly involved in the initiation of inspiration. Okay, medulla, it initiates the respiration. Now the regulation is under the control of the pontine centers, that is apneustic center and the pneumotaxic center. Pneumotaxic center, apneustic centers, they will regulate the respiratory activity. Who initiates the inspiration and who initiates the respiration? It's the medulla. In the medulla we also know that's the 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex. Now let's talk about the pontine centers now. What are the two pontine centers? Pneumotaxic center, apneustic center. Remember, pneumotaxic center PA, pneumotaxic center always inhibits the apneustic center. Now what is the function of this pneumotaxic center? Sir, pneumotaxic center limits inspiration. For example, think like this: whenever you have enough amount of air into your lungs, do you need further inspiration? No, you need to stop the inspiration. So who stops that? Pneumotaxic center limits inspiration. Whenever you have proper tidal volume of air into your lungs, whenever you take tidal volume of air into your lungs, automatically inspiration need to be stopped. Who will limit that inspiration? Pneumotaxic center. Now what is apneustic center doing? Apneustic center prolongs the inspiration. Now see, try to understand like this. The 𝗑𝐵𝐺𝐻𝐵 complex, this fellow, pre-Bötzinger complex. What it will do? It's a pacemaker. It initiates the inspiration. After pre-Bötzinger complex, the apneustic center is activated. What this apneustic center will do? Apneustic center, it prolongs the inspiration. It continues the inspiration. Okay, it continues the inspiration. So, initiation is by pre-Bötzinger complex. Maintenance of the inspiration is by apneustic center. Now, not only that, important point, see, apneustic center will stimulate the dorsal respiratory group. Apneustic center will stimulate the dorsal respiratory group. So, both apneustic center and dorsal respiratory group are both involved in prolonging the inspiration or smooth rise in tidal volume. See, very simple. Now, look at this image. So, this one, apneustic center, what it will do? Apneustic center stimulates the dorsal respiratory group. Now, when the dorsal respiratory group is stimulated, it will produce what? It will produce the ramp signals. Now, these ramp signals will help in smooth rise in tidal volume. Smooth rise in tidal volume. Okay, not a sudden rise, smooth, gradually, smooth rise in tidal volume. Now, initiation is by pre-Bötzinger complex. Maintenance is by, remember, both apneustic center as well as dorsal respiratory group. Apneustic center stimulates the dorsal respiratory group. So, the dorsal respiratory group produces the ramp signals. So, ramp signal helps in smooth rise in tidal volume. But if I am talking about the ventral respiratory group, VRG, ventral respiratory group will be helpful only during forceful expiration. Okay, needed during forceful expiration. Okay, it controls the expiratory part, okay, which is not that important for your exams. Now, let's see how inspiration is initiated, maintained and terminated. Now, initiation. Who initiates? Pacemaker. Who is a pacemaker? Pre-Bötzinger complex, where it is present in the medulla. Okay, for every, try to understand like this. Every minute, how many times we will breathe? 12 times. So, for every 5 seconds, once this pre-Bötzinger complex is going to be activated, what it will do? It will stimulate the phrenic nerve. The pre-Bötzinger complex is going to produce, like it's going to give the fibers directly down to the spinal cord. Now, in the spinal cord, C3, C4, C5, from C3, C4, C5 segments, phrenic nerve is coming. Now, this phrenic nerve, where it will go? It will go to the diaphragm. So, now the pre-Bötzinger complex is going to stimulate the phrenic nerve. When phrenic nerve is stimulated, it will cause contraction of the diaphragm. When diaphragm is contracted, now air will start to enter into the lungs. There is the initiation of inspiration by causing contraction of diaphragm. Now, let's see the maintenance. After this pre-Bötzinger complex, who will be activated? Apneustic center is activated. Now, what this apneustic center will do? It will stimulate the dorsal respiratory group. Now, the DRG is going to produce the ramp signals. When ramp signals are there, there is smooth rise in tidal volume. So, initiation is completed. Later on, maintenance is also completed. Now, whenever you have enough amount of air into your lungs, 500 ml of air have entered into your lungs, or 750 ml of air have entered into your lungs. Like, that's a tidal volume, 500 to 750. So, when enough air enters into your lungs, now in the lungs there are these receptors called as lung stretch receptors. Now, they will be stimulated. Okay, enough air have came into the lungs. Now, the lung stretch receptors are going to stimulate the vagus nerve. Now, vagus nerve is going from the lungs to the central nervous system. This vagal nerve, what it will do? It will directly go to the apneustic center. So, vagus nerve is going to inhibits the apneustic center. Now, whenever the apneustic center is inhibited, automatically DRG will be inhibited. Now, whenever there is no DRG, there are no ramp signals. If there are no ramp signals, there is no further rise in tidal volume. So, inspiration is stopped. Okay, so inspiration is stopped. So, lung stretch, stimulate the vagal afferents. Vagal afferents will inhibit the apneustic center. And DRG is going to be inhibited. Okay, DRG is going to be inhibited. So, no further rise in tidal volume. Now, please concentrate. It's not only the lung stretch which will inhibit the apneustic center via the vagus nerve, but also the pneumotaxic center. Okay. Now, these vagal afferents will also stimulate the pneumotaxic center. Now, when the pneumotaxic center is stimulated, we have said PA, pneumotaxic center inhibits the apneustic center, P inhibits A. When apneustic center is inhibited, automatically what happens? Dorsal respiratory group is, okay, it's also inhibited. Now, if you understand this, now let's talk about some conditions where the respiration is affected or lesions. Okay, lesions where the respiration is affected. Now, for example, let's start from here. Now, if there is a lesion below medulla, okay, there is a lesion below medulla, what happened to respiration? Now, please concentrate, guys. See, now pons, 2 centers are there. In the medulla, 3 centers are there. One important center is the 𝐵𝐺 complex. Now, the 𝐵𝐺 complex cannot activate the phrenic nerve. Whenever there is a lesion in the medulla, please look at here, guys. Whenever there is a lesion at this level, now what will happen? Now the 𝐵𝐺 complex, the pacemaker, cannot control the C3, C4, C5 spinal nerve, that is the phrenic nerve. Now whenever the phrenic nerve is not stimulated, what happens? Simply there is no initiation, Okay, there is no initiation. So what happens? Respiration stops. Okay, respiration stops. This is what happens during hanging also in India. Whenever the person is hanged, how the patient is going to die, or how that criminal is going to die? It's the, see, whenever the person is hanged, the odontoid process of axis vertebra, the odontoid process of the axis vertebra is going to be broken. Usually this is atlas and this is axis, right? Okay, now the odontoid process of this axis, it will rupture whenever the hanging happens, whenever the person is hanged suddenly. This odontoid process which is present here at the C2 level, now it will be fractured, and this odontoid process will compress the medulla. In the medulla, there are these initiation centers. 𝐵𝐺 complex is affected, dorsal respiratory group is affected. Now what will happen? The inspiration is stopped. So whenever there is a lesion, especially below medulla, what will happen? Inspiration stops or respiration stops. Now let's talk about whenever there is a lesion in the pontomedullary junction. Now medulla is the center for initiation of inspiration. Initiates inspiration. The beginning we have discussed. Pons will regulate the respiration. Pons regulate. Medulla initiates. Now whenever there is a lesion between pontomedullary junction, means something like this. Here the lesion is here. Okay. Now yes, there is no problem. Okay. There is no problem that respiration is initiated, but it will not be controlled. Why? Because the pons cannot control the medullary centers. So there is irregular respiration. Whenever there is a pontomedullary lesion, there is irregular respiration. Now other thing, whenever there is a lesion in mid-pontine region, here in the mid-pontine region there is a lesion. Now what will happen? Normally in the upper pons there is pneumotaxic center. In the lower pons there is apneustic center. Pneumotaxic center will inhibit the apneustic center. Now when apneustic center is inhibited, inspiration stops. Now what happens if there is a lesion in the mid-pontine region? Now the pneumotaxic center, it cannot inhibit the apneustic center. Now the apneustic center is kept on activated. Apneustic center will stimulate the dorsal respiratory group. Dorsal respiratory group, it is kept on producing the ramp signals. Ramp signals will cause prolonged inspiration, which is also called as apneusis or inspiratory spasms. The patient is having prolonged inspiration, that is called as apneusis. So whenever there is a lesion in the mid-pontine region where the where the pneumotaxic center is separated from the apneustic center, the patient is going to have prolonged inspiration, markedly prolonged inspiration. This is called as apneusis or inspiratory spasm. Okay, so whenever the lesion in the pontomedullary junction where the pons and medulla are separated, there is irregular respiration. Okay, now let's talk about whenever there is a lesion in the above the pons. Okay, above the pons. Normally the pontine center and the medullary centers, they are involved in controlling involuntary respiration. But you can take the respiration to your control. See, I can take the respiration to my control, which means certain higher centers like the cortex. The cortex can control the medullary centers, or the cortex can control the brainstem center, so that you can have the inspiration voluntarily and expiration voluntarily. But if you have a lesion above pons, okay, now see, there is a lesion, here is the cortex, imagine here is the cortex. Now this cortex can control the brainstem centers. Whenever there is a lesion here, now the cortex cannot control the medullary centers or pontine centers, so that you will lose what? You will lose voluntary control over the respiration. So lesion above pons. Lesion above pons will cause, it will cause the higher centers can no longer influence the brainstem center. So there is loss of voluntary control on respiration. So these are the effects of lesions at different sites and how the respiration is going to be affected. Okay guys, in this video we have discussed about the neural regulation of respiration. Hope the video is helpful. Thank you.